Hello, my name is Ashley. Welcome to day two of our Peace and Justice event. Before we get started, I would like to take a few minutes to acknowledge the lives we've lost to gun violence every day. On average, 100 people are killed by guns in America daily, and even more are shot and injured. We are hoping that this two-day event will bring us closer to finding solutions that have lasting impacts on those who are affected by gun violence. And as we think about the lives we have lost, I would like to ask if all of us could take a 30-second moment of silence. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jasper. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns, and welcome to a conversation about policing in America. We have three panelists with us to talk about and answer some questions about different ways law enforcement plays a role in gun violence and general public safety within that realm. We have some prepared questions which were sent out beforehand to the panelists. And now if you three would like to do quick 1 minute introductions, you can feel free to do that now. And just kind of give like an introduction to yourself and as well as a background on what you do.
Hi, I am Cami Chavis. I am a professor at the Wake Forest University School of Law. I'm also a special advisor to the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence and Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence. And I was a former prosecutor, so I'm really aware of the goal of the toll that gun violence has taken on many communities. And now I work a lot on criminal justice reform and police reform.
All right, I'm Alex Williams, a neighborhood safety coordinator with Safe and Sound. I'm serving in the District 5 area, so that's the Amani and Harambe neighborhoods in Milwaukee. Most of my background is actually in education, youth development, and working with families and communities. I took this role to try to improve community police relations in my neighborhood and make that learning a two-way conversation. And I guess one of the philosophies I'm live by is if not me, then who? If we don't have somebody who's from our Milwaukee neighborhoods working directly with law enforcement to be the voice of the community, then who is doing that for us? So that's why I'm here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tatiana. I use she, her pronouns. I am a policy associate with March for Our Lives, but I've been doing gun violence prevention work for a while now. Actually, I was a WAVE intern, so shout out to all you interns that put together this amazing event. It's so cool, and to just see how far this internship program has gone, it's really cool to see. So I'm just excited to be here. I'm from Milwaukee, so just seeing gun violence, in our community every single day is really why I got involved. But also, I lost my aunt in 2017 in a murder-suicide at the hands of her husband, who actually was a Milwaukee police officer. So excited for this conversation.
Thank you. Welcome. We're very happy to have you here. So we're going to get started with some of the questions we have. And the first one, what do you believe are some of the leading causes of gun violence? So if anyone would like to go first, feel free.
Yeah, I can start. I honestly think the biggest root cause of gun violence is poverty. I genuinely believe that, every single shooting is a policy failure. When we think about, what happens after a shooting or even the before of a shooting, I think every single shooting is really a policy failure. And I think the biggest policy failure in this country is poverty. There's no reason why we have folks that are houseless, that are going to school without having, a full healthy breakfast, or going home hungry. There's really there's no excuse for poverty in this country. So for me, that's really the biggest root cause of gun violence.
Hi, can everyone hear me? I think I'm having a little trouble with my internet.
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, so yeah, when we think about root causes, and again, Tatiana has mentioned poverty, but I think also there are a lot of structural things that are happening in communities. Again, Tatiana's mentioned poverty, homelessness, lack of social services. But one thing we also need to think about is just conflict resolution. There are many people who have conflicts and are searching for ways to solve those. So that is another root cause. I also think that we really can't have this conversation if we don't talk about drugs, but it's not the use of drugs or not necessarily, but it's the fact that we don't have the regulation that we need, and so that causes violence as well. So if we decriminalize some of these things, and we could possibly see less violence. And finally, I'll actually mention that, and I know that we're going to get into discussions about police reform, but I am a former prosecutor. I do believe that we need to have relationships, positive, healthy relationships with law enforcement in our communities. And unfortunately, some of the violence that we see from police officers is actually impeding the building of those relationships. So when we have gun violence, something that happens in our communities, we need to find out who perpetrated that. We need to make sure that person doesn't do it again. We need to make sure that we know who that person is, and so that we can do a review of the folks around them. Because another thing we know is that if you are a victim of gun violence, or you perpetrate gun violence, then those in your sphere, those closest to you, can also be at risk. So when we have that deficit of information, we're really we don't have everything that we need, all the tools that we need to combat violence in our communities. So having stronger relationships with law enforcement to help investigate those and bring folks to justice is imperative. But again, it's very difficult to do that when we don't have those strong relationships that we need.
Yeah, and just to echo that, this is a systemic issue. I think we have to look at the history of our country, and how it's rooted in violence and the glorification of violence as a means to prosper and to get ahead. And then combine that with the access to guns, who has access to guns, why they have access to those weapons. I think there's a lot of things we can look at. If we start just with the racist history of gun laws in America, we struggle, right, to pass just and what everybody feels like is equitable and fair gun reform in this country. But that's often not the case when it's to control a minority population. So there are always three instances that I think of. In the period immediately following slavery, guns were made illegal for African Americans to possess, as a control tactic. We don't want people who are newly freed to have access to weapons to further their freedom and fight then against the people who recently were oppressing them. In the 60s, when the Black Panthers mission was to police the police, or gun reform was then passed, that made those actions illegal. And so we see that uh, it depends who is holding the guns, and what those guns are being used for as a means of like oppressing people. And we think about causes of gun violence now. I just think about the amount of access to guns, and the fact that there's more than one gun to every person in America, and we have like some this this cultural like obsession with guns and firearms, and I think that also leads to a lot of the gun violence incidents that we see.
Thank you. Yeah, if anyone, Tatiana, Cami, if you want to add on to what Alex said or go back to what one of you said previously, go ahead. And Cami, if you're okay sharing, I would love to hear more about conflict resolution.
Yeah, so we know that there are times when you can have, or there are programs, right? When folks talk about violence disruptors, right? So people, being able to, this goes back to when we're thinking about in our schools, right? And young folks, and who are they talking to? Who can they talk to about the problems that are happening in their lives? And I can recall from my own life and my children's lives, conflicts happen. But when you have, as some of the other panelists said, when you have an easy access to firearms, I mean, these can escalate, and you have that, and I'm particularly thinking about youth violence, where we know that the adolescent brain, there are tons of scientific studies, and case law is even backs up these studies, that we know that young people, they simply through actually their early 20s, right, don't necessarily have the same maturity physiologically as adults. And so this combination of the structural racism, poverty, hopelessness, violence, lack of conflict resolution, all of that going on in the adolescent brain with the easy access to firearms and other means, it's just a really toxic combination.
All right, thank you for expanding on that. We're going to move on to our next question. Do you think law enforcement is a key partner when it comes to solutions? Why or why not? And Tatiana, if you would like to start, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it really needs to be in the hands of the community. We should be the architects of what safety looks like and what that reimagining process looks like. Both my parents, actually, well, they're now retired, were from MPD. And my dad was actually a homicide detective. So he's seen a lot of the gun violence in this community. But I do truly think it needs to be the hands of community members. They should be making the solutions. When we talk about, what does gun violence prevention truly look like? And also, our elected officials really need to do their part in making sure they're listening to community members. Because I feel like we have these conversations all the time, and we want funds to go to, community-based organizations that are doing the work, but we never see that money come through. So it's like we have to hold, our elected officials accountable too. So.
And so I would definitely want to echo what Tatiana said about it being in the hands of the community and community organizations being able to have the power and the means to be able to inflict that positive change on their communities. I think that right now, as it stands, and the way that I'm going to answer the question is the current state of what's going on in the country at the moment. Until people get things like police reform, and some groups are like fighting for abolition. Until then, I think it's important that those community organizations are at the table with law enforcement so that they're able to influence policy and things of that nature. I think that one of the best experiences I've had as a neighborhood safety coordinator is actually going to MPD Citizens Academy, where they teach you about how police officers are trained, what police procedures are, what the proper way to conduct certain police procedures is, and what the incorrect way is. And I think that it's important for all community members to have that knowledge. And I think that it's not publicized enough, right? Like the information is public, what the code of conduct is and what all the police procedures are in certain situations. It's public, but it's not publicized. And so people, once community organizations have that information, and they're able to use that same language to then empower the community and fight the system of oppressive policing, get better. If they do want police, having community policing be the model that is expanded on and actually utilized and is the actual heart of what policing is. Until that happens, we do have community organizations I feel like need that voice and need to be able to sit down with police officers, but also bring to the table that language. So I think the biggest example for me is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which put a ban on chokeholds being utilized against citizens. However, in a lot of the codes of conduct and a lot of the police procedures, there's nothing in it that says chokehold. So while it feels like a victory for community organizations, it actually hasn't altered those police procedures. And that's what I mean by having that language and having that knowledge to be able to create transformative, like actual sweeping change across those systems. So until we get to the point where police presence isn't necessary, I think we do have to work with those organizations in order to create actual change in them.
And I would just add, echo the sentiments of both police and model of policing do you use? And they'll say, see, so that you guys can still hear me.
You actually cut out, so we weren't able to hear what you just said.
Okay, so I'm going to turn my camera off for a second because I think that might help
Okay.
my bandwidth. I apologize for my technical difficulties. But I was just going to, again, echo both of those sentiments. And when I think about community, there's not a police chief in America that won't say, we are implementing community policing. If you ask a police chief across the country, like, what model of policing are you using? They're going to say community policing, but we know that can't be the case. As Tatiana said, the communities in a true model of community policing, it is the community that sets the priorities. You should never have a policy or a practice that's implemented without community consent. And we've kind of gotten away from that. And when you think about, well, who is the community? You know, is it voters? Because all the voters, right, in Milwaukee may not be necessarily, we know that all of Milwaukee is, and I'm just using that as that city as an example, because I'm looking at Tatiana's t-shirt, but like, when you're just like looking at that city, we know that there are many different communities within that city, and they are not all policed in the same way. And that is a problem. And I want to go back to the George Floyd Policing Act, because I do think that there are a lot of really valuable reforms in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And these are, unfortunately, these are not new ideas. Ending racial profiling, limiting chokeholds, limiting no-knock warrants, all of creating a national registry of police misconduct. These are all ideas that we have had in the criminal justice reform community for decades, right? But they just haven't been passed. And they still, even though this has passed the House, it has not passed the Senate. So it is not law. And we need to make sure that that act can pass in the Senate. And we also need to and this is in my view, is that while I'm a very big fan of federal intervention when we need it, we really do have to look to our local communities, because a lot of local communities have been able to get these certain types of these measures passed, and they've done so very quickly. And again, when you're working at the local level, you can really ensure that that neighborhoods and communities that are touched by that type of police violence are the ones, are where the change is occurring.
Yeah, thank you. That is, yeah, it's definitely important to look towards more communities instead of stuff on a federal level, because while federal levels can help, having that community voice is also incredibly important. So if no one else has anything to add on to this question, we'll move on to the next one. In your opinion, what role, if any, should police play within communities? Is it similar or different from what you see currently? And Cami or Alex, if one of you could start at this time, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just very briefly, because I think I've said a lot of response to that, but I think that absolutely it has to be different than it is today. We're not. You can look at the homicide clearance rates from around the country and look at the zip codes and where they are, and ask yourself what type of police presence, what's happening in those communities. We've lived for decades under, stop and frisk, right? That's been a term that was used a lot in for the practice that was happening in New York City, but it happens everywhere. Lots of major metropolitan areas, Black and brown young men indiscriminately stopped, frisked, and the hit rate, what we call in law enforcement the hit rate, just in terms of when you actually do find some type of contraband, is really, really very, very low. So it's a very expensive practice in terms of the toll that it takes on the young men who are subjected to it, and it's not even an effective law enforcement tool. It's not even getting guns or drugs or things like that off of the street. So that's one practice. But what we're seeing in many communities, police are being an occupying force rather than a guardians, right? And so I have a really good friend who has written a lot on this, Seth Stoughton. You can check out his articles, but we talk about this warrior mentality that police officers have, particularly when it comes to communities of color. And having been a prosecutor in Washington, D.C. many, many years ago, you could see the results when you look in the courtroom, and every defendant that you see is a Black or brown male. You have to ask yourself, is there not other crime happening in other districts? Is there not drug use? Is there not domestic violence happening in other areas of the city? And of course, there was. Of course, there is. And it's just being treated in police differently. So when you have those types of disparities, you're going to get a lack of trust in our communities, and that is what's going to really impedes the ability of law enforcement to work with communities to actually get guns off of the street and out of the hands of people who are not supposed to have.
Yeah, and I think the question of what role should police play in communities, I would love to live in a society where even the thought of police is completely unnecessary. Um, and I think that's about strengthening community organizations and social services to be able to take over those jobs or those roles that we rely on police officers for, that many times they don't have enough training for. Other people have gone to school to deal with certain things that they could see on the street that they shouldn't be dealing with. So I think that we should always, no matter if we're in, and this is to if we're working in a nonprofit role, if we're working in social services, if we're working in service of any kind, our goal should always be to work ourselves out of a job always. And what I mean by that is we should be so, because those organizations and those things exist because we've identified a problem, and we want to create something to fix it, or a coalition to fix it, or do something to help remedy the problem. So eventually we want to be able to say that this problem is fixed. There are no more jobs in this social service work because this problem has been eliminated. And I think we want to get to that point with police in America, is where everything that they can do is handled by a community member, somebody from an organization or a social service who has extensive training in it and has healing and restorative justice at the heart of whatever that practice is, and whatever services people may need. So I definitely think that um, in a perfect world, there is no police. There's no need for police. There's no need for those law enforcement. The idea of enforcement. There's no place for enforcement um, in our communities, because they're thriving and because the community is taking care of itself and has the capacity to take care of itself.
Yeah. So, at March for Our Lives, we kind of came with these, and these aren't like, we didn't make these up, but like these like 5 forces of gun violence, right? And we kind of spoke about them, like poverty, mental health crisis, armed supremacy, political apathy, and gun glorification. And to me, police uphold these 5 forces. So I'm unable to see how they can be involved in solutions to solving gun violence, right? I mean, we even see, and we know this, police don't stop crime, they don't stop violence. I even think about when I was in high school, like as simple as like, yeah, I definitely cheated on tests before, even though I knew the consequences, but there was a need for me, right? I was at cheer practice, I was up late, I didn't study, so I cheated on a test or something like that. And I so like, and even on a micro level, like I don't think the answer to solving gun violence is law enforcement. I think it really is community care and making sure that all of our needs are met, and that we're really just looking after each other and taking care of each other, and pretty much echoing what Alex has said already. So.
Yeah, thank you. That was very insightful. If we are ready, we'll move on to the next question. How do you feel about defunding / diverting police funds to other sources, such as schools, more mental health options for people who are struggling? And whoever wants to start, go ahead.
Well, I'll start, and I'll be very honest here. When I hear, I understand when folks, given everything that our country that we've gone through, not just for the past few decades, but for centuries. And Alex mentioned, our country is founded on, racial violence, and the precursors to modern police departments were slave patrols, and they regulated not only the movement of slaves, but the movement of free Blacks. And then we can analogize even some of the practices used then. I mean, I mentioned stop and frisk, and it's very much like what we see today. Folks, walking, controlling the movement, asking you who you are, what are you doing, those kinds of things. So I hear that. But I think I take a broader view when I think about crime in our society. And I would love if we did not have a need for police officers or law enforcement or punishment. But when I see people like Bernie Madoff, right? Let's take it out of the local violence and think about the all of the white collar crimes that we see, right? How are we going to take care of that? When I look at the Capitol insurgents and folks that beat other innocent people and beat, just people who were in the Capitol trying to defend lawmakers, maimed them. When I think about that, I don't know that I can say those people shouldn't be incapacitated for a period of time or something like that. So that doesn't mean, in my mind, that there's not, there's certainly, we shouldn't be thinking about putting, quote, more boots on the ground. I don't like that term at all, because the officers we have, we need to make sure that they are better trained. We need to make sure, we need to be very careful about who we're hiring. We need to be careful about asking them to do things that don't, an armed first responder should not be the first and only mental health call, or you have a child who is literally, we've seen 5-6-year-old children arrested in school. Those kinds of things don't need to happen. And so we need to change our culture around things like that. But to me, I'm going to stop short of this notion of defunding police, and because I also work with hate crimes and hate crimes against Black and brown people, and against trans folks and folks different sexual orientations, and I've seen people, murdered and beaten and raped, and I believe that there is a role for law enforcement in our country. I think that it shouldn't look how it looks today, and I hope for a better future again, and there's certainly transformative reform needs to happen, but in my lifetime, I'm not sure that I'm going to see some of those issues taken care of, and we need some responses to deter crime. That doesn't mean that we don't need to focus on the root causes. We absolutely do, and we certainly have not been doing enough. And sometimes oftentimes, most of the time, law enforcement tactics are directed unfairly against minority communities and in the harshest way. But if you look broadly, I can't, with a blanket statement, say that defunding is, or abolishing.
So I think there's space for money that is currently going towards law enforcement to be spent differently, yes. And I think that there's a broader argument to be made about the percentage of the budget that police funds should go towards, and law enforcement funds in general should go towards. I do think police departments should be demilitarized completely. There's no reason that police departments need tanks or military grade weapons. If we need military grade weapons, let's call them the military. That's a whole nother conversation. I think that budget money that goes towards the police can be spent towards creating a program where police officers actually have to complete a degree to be police officers. If we're going to keep police officers in our society, I think that there's space for an expansion of domestic violence advocates, trauma response advocates, for youth workers, for mental health services and agencies, for healing and restorative justice circles and restorative justice practices in general. I think that a lot of money can be diverted towards those things until we reach a point in our society where like we were talking about before, where there's no need for police officers in communities and over policing communities and stop and frisk and all these things that come with it. But I think there are things that can be done immediately. And I think there are longer term goals in terms of defunding and abolition and things like that. But I'll stick with that a lot of funds can be diverted into different programs and trainings and resources for people, for community members from police funds.
Yeah, so I do one day want to see a world where police and prisons don't exist. I do consider myself a student of abolition. I'm so thankful for folks like Marian Kaba, who, writes these very well-written books, and it's really, taught me so much, and like, what does it really mean to reimagine public safety? But I do think there's steps that we can take where we're not just like, oh my gosh, we're abolishing the police tomorrow. Like, right, that's not going to happen. We have actually a campaign in March for Our Lives called Peace Without Police. And really it's a campaign on removing student resource officers or SROs from schools. And I think that's a really small step that we can take. What are we telling kids when they go to school and they see an armed presence or they see a police officer? What does that say to us? What are we telling our next generation of folks that we're building up? I do think there's small incremental steps that we can take, and I think there's these ways that we can get involved that I consider that is a way of divesting and investing into communities, is going to school without seeing police presence. I think that's really, really important. When I went to high school, we were actually the only high school that didn't have metal detectors every single day in NPS. We had them randomly. And even still then, that random check, I'm like, I'm just trying to get my education. Like, why am I going through a metal detector? Like, what is happening? Like, it's makes no sense to me. But yeah, I do think that we should defund the police. I think another example of policing not working is, and I hate to bring up Chicago, but the mayor just brought in more funding in the policing. And of course, we're seeing, unfortunately, gun violence continuing an uptick. So I think it just continues to show that this system, it doesn't work. Any system that's built on white supremacy has to go eventually. So.
And really quick, if I could just jump in, I think that getting school resource officers out of schools is actually a huge step, just because of the overall nature, especially in Milwaukee and NPS, of surveillance of students, of young people, and how invasive that system is, and how it's a direct link to the school to prison pipeline. Like, being told immediately upon your arrival that you cannot be trusted, empty your backpack, walk through these metal detectors, because we don't trust you as a community member. Somebody like Tatiana saying just wants to get their education, and now you've made them feel like they are criminalized, right? And we've seen it as young as in middle school. We had when I was working at Barack Obama School of Career and Technical Education, we had fifth graders going through metal detectors, and just like the psychological toll that takes. So imagine if that kid goes to that school all through high school. That's 8 years out of their life where they feel like they've been a criminal in a school building. And we have to break those cycles. And just thinking about even just I know surveillance cameras are there for safety, but even the presence of those can sometimes feel like, I'm always being watched, I can't be trusted. And just we need to separate punitive justice from our education system. And schools that are saying that, I know it's a little bit of a tangent, but schools that are saying that we invest in restorative practices, you cannot have punishment on top of restorative practices. So if you're saying that we're against school resource officers, we're against, we have 100% anti-bullying policy, all these things, like the second you suspend a kid, that's a punitive punishment. If they're out of they're being told you have to be separated from your peers. It's equivalent to putting a kid who's too young to understand in timeout. And I think that we have to look at just our culture of punishment and of law enforcement and of school rule enforcement, and how it aligns to the oppressive nature of policing at times. So I know that's a little bit off what we're talking about, but I just want to hop in on the school resource officer thing. I think that's a huge step towards more equity in our country.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate what Tatiana and Alex have said. Police officers have no role in schools. School resource officers need to be out of schools. There's also no empirical data that shows that they're having an effect on gun violence in schools, and so they shouldn't be there. And they themselves are armed in the schools. That if in some locations that doesn't make any sense. So definitely school resources resource officers out of schools. And I would also say that that we should not have police officers doing traffic stops. Where I am in North Carolina, we have a lot of data on Black and brown people being stopped more often than their white counterparts. And not only are they stopped more, they're searched more, they're arrested more for the same offenses. And so again, just the whole like traffic interdiction. You don't need an armed first responder for that. We do have, and I am concerned about the surveillance state that we live in. But since we live in the surveillance state, use that. You can send somebody a ticket in the mail. You do not have to stop their car and pull them out and pull them over. And that's not safe all the time for officers either, right? But if you're pulling somebody over for a traffic stop, there's really no technology that doesn't help take care of even that. So we have to be very careful about technology, but since we have it, let's use it and let's not put people in contact where they don't need to be in contact. And these end up in these very dangerous situations. And the other last quick thing I would say about when we think about the role of police, we have to go back to, and so I teach criminal law, and we have to go back to the substantive criminal law. We have so many things that an officer cannot lawfully approach you unless there's reasonable suspicion that you are breaking the law. And we have so many laws. There's so much activity that's taken up there. So we really have to look at the substantive criminal law and walk back those violations. And that's where I was kind of going with the, decriminalizing certain substances, all kinds of things that are wrapped up in law enforcement that don't have to be. And if you take out a big chunk of that legal hook that allows the officers to stop you, then you'll have, I think we can begin to rebalance our society.
Yeah, thank you all for your answers. We're gonna move on. What major events have led to the way that we currently view police? So I'm curious to hear all of your perspectives, really, if you have one. Tatiana, I'm curious as to what you are aware of, as you are also a young person like me. So I'm curious to kind of see your perspective on things. But also Cami and Alex, I'm curious to hear what you have to say too.
Yeah, I also think it's a little bit different for me because both my parents, were law enforcement. So like I grew up with guns in my house. I grew up with, two black parents that are also, in this system of policing. So I think I have a little bit of an interesting perspective on it. But of course, even like when I was growing up, I got like the talk and like what to do when you get pulled over, and like to be wary of police and be cautious and make sure that, all these things that like, so many Black and brown folks get this discussion like growing up. So I think also the increase, and I think especially for us because we're young and we grew up in this age of social media, like we can't turn away. It's really hard to turn away when we see these videos of police violence and police brutality. Like for me, especially last summer, it was really hard for me to just like look away. I mean, it's just like right there, like on our Instagram feeds, on our Twitter feeds, on Facebook, like it's just like everywhere. So I think that also has really had an impact. I think just on us just growing up and seeing that on social media. I remember when I was like very young, I think like maybe 12, 13, it's still like stuck with me. It was a young girl at school and was like getting arrested in her classroom. And it was just like very harsh. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this is like ridiculous. It makes no sense for this to be happening to a girl that's like my age, but my size. Which is like, even just seeing that and growing up with that and seeing that on social media, it's like I just want to see like pictures of my friends. I want to look up cute dog videos, and I'm seeing like police brutality and police violence. And so I think that's also has really altered, and that's probably a little bit different than other generations.
What I think is, so it's interesting for, again, I appreciate the personal story that Tatiana gave. So I'll give a bit of a personal story, and that is, and this is going to date me since Jasper already call me old. So this will date me even more. Just kidding there, Jasper. But I was a junior in high school when I saw Rodney King pulled out of a car and beaten by the Los Angeles Police Department. And if any of you have had an opportunity to view that, you'll see that not only was he beaten, kicked, hit by those 4 officers, again, during a traffic stop, but there many other law enforcement agents responded, and they just stood there. They saw that happening, they knew it was wrong, and they just stood there. So when you fast forward to what we saw with George Floyd and Derek Chauvin, his knee on George Floyd's neck and those other officers, that really resonated with me. And before, that's my generation's story, but before my generation, there were other generations. Folks had all these stories, and every generation continues to have their Rodney King, Timothy Thomas, Sandra Bland, Eric Garner, we can name, there are too many to name. And so I think the current state has really just been a constant state. We're seeing this, and we are just really are past the tipping point and saying enough is enough. And we'll end with just saying that another thing I think that how we're viewing this differently is because when we look at if you look at the war on drugs, right, in the 70s and 80s, and really the war on drugs used to justify a lot of these aggressive police tactics, we didn't see that same level of police violence when it came to the opioid crisis. So we know you can do it differently. And that's not to say that we should see that during the opioid crisis. I'm saying, well, you have a solution. You saw the solution. Again, I mentioned the Capitol insurgency. You saw an incredible amount of police restraint. So we know you can do it. And that's why, that is why we are, I think, in our country feeling the way we feel. We know you can do it when you have a choice, and you're just not choosing that restraint when it comes to Black and brown communities and people and their.
Yeah, and I think it's nothing is new, right? It's just become more exposed, it's become more televised, more publicized, more accessible to watch instances of police misconduct and police brutality. Because Kimmy spoke to it earlier, the inception of policing in America is founded on slave catching, and policing free Black people in the North, and that culture has permeated its way through and is still at the heart of the misconduct and the officers who choose to color outside of the lines. And so when we think about, I think for me personally, the incidents that tug at my heartstrings the most are that of Mike Brown, because I think that story resonates with me just because he was on his way to college, and there was no reason that incident had to turn violent, right? And because of his perceived criminality, because of his size, because of his race, because of all these historical injustices and oppressive things that have led to that moment, a young man with a bright future lost his life. And I think that combined with, I remember being in college when George Zimmerman was on trial for Trayvon Martin, and as soon as the first count came back not guilty, I remember being so upset that I turned the TV off. And had a roommate at the time who expressed disappointment that I turned the TV off because he wanted to watch it. And it wasn't. At that point, I realized that for some people, this is entertainment, right? And CNN is their ESPN, or like or their E, or it's their form of entertainment, and it's difficult when it easily could have been you. I've been pulled over before in situations where there was nothing I've done wrong, and the only questions were, "What are you doing over here? What are you doing? What are you doing over here?" And so that's not lost on me. And so when I think about young men who have unfortunately lost their lives, combined with the racist history of policing. I think that all those things account for people's justified view of however they feel about the state of policing in America.
Yeah, thank you, Tatiana and Cami, for sharing your personal stories, and then Alex for that story too. It definitely is hard seeing that some people view this type of stuff as entertainment. Because I'm white, so I can't exactly relate fully to most of the cases we hear about, but when it comes to stuff like trans violence, it's definitely hard for me, and I have to take a step away just to let myself breathe for a minute. And the fact that some people find these kinds of things entertaining, it's really hard to process. Yeah, so unless Cami, I saw you on mute. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I told the organizers that unfortunately I have to hop off just a little bit early, so I'm going to stay here and then I will drop off when I need to. But I was going to say that you bring up the point of the violence that we've seen against all types of underrepresented people, is unacceptable. And I think when we think about the violence against trans people, that is another frontier that we really have failed to address. And so I just wanted to name that.
Yeah, thank you. But as I was saying, unless anyone has anything else to add, let's move on to the next question. What comes to mind immediately after hearing about a police shooting incident? And Alex, I'm curious to hear your perspective, because of your role and how you, because of your role in the community.
Yeah, I think my reaction has shifted since I've gotten this role. I think that before um, police shootings and things of that nature were, as much as they were personal, they were always one step away, right? They were like one step removed from my actual reality. Fortunately, I've never personally been shot at. I've never been shot. I haven't lost anybody in my life close to me because of gun violence, and I'm fortunate in that regard. But I think that being in this role as a neighborhood safety coordinator, um, you when you hear about things, it becomes more personal. It becomes, I wonder, is this resident okay? Or if there were bullets like shot through a house, I hope there were no kids at home. And I think about all the like the different components of what happens after a shooting, um, and the trauma that's associated with it. The people who are witnesses, if people need therapy, if they need healing, if they need other kind of services. And I think that before I looked at it more as just like I was sad for the city, right? And I was just like, these incidents, it's sad, it's unfortunate that these happen, um, when it's upsetting, right? And now it's more, I look at it as what can I do to help make the situation better? If there was a kid who was a witness, how can I get them in touch with the trauma response team to help get them social services? Or if they need a therapist, or if the shooting incident happened because of a domestic violence incident, get connecting people with resources to help combat that. So I think that I've shifted more from a visceral, like emotional reaction to more of a technical and like how can I help reaction when it comes to whether it's a citizen shooting or a police shooting. That's kind of how my mentality has shifted since I've taken on my role as a neighborhood safety coordinator.
And I'll just add before I go, I'll just say that everything that Alex said, your heart goes out for, for the victim of the shooting, the family, the entire community, because these things reverberate right throughout the community. It's not just another, person, but we can't help but thinking like that could be my son, that could be my cousin, that could be my uncle, that could be me. Those types of things. But the other thought that I have is that I worry that we're becoming desensitized, that our society could becoming desensitized. And you see that when, and it's resonant in some of the things that you all talked about in terms of people thinking that this is entertainment, right? No, this is like, and also too, I've served as like an expert witness in cases and have, been close to some of these issues, and I teach these uses of force in class, and it's like the imagery of this is not entertainment. This is the last moments of someone's life, and we really have to, in some ways, you want people to be able to understand the outrage and the calls for reform. People have to sometimes be a witness to that, because otherwise they can't process it. And so it's changed, but at the very same time, it's just, how did we get here? Why can't you just understand the sanctity of life? Why can't you understand the sanctity of life without having to see it over and over and over again? And so that bothers me, it worries me that these images are out there, and what it's doing to a whole other generation of kids.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I'll add is because I work with a lot of survivors and young people who've been impacted by gun violence. I've been seeing amongst my peers and my friends that when there's a shooting that happens, it's often re-triggering. And I can also speak for myself, especially when it's domestic violence related or police related. It's almost like re-triggering. So something that I've been really big on trying to like curate more safe spaces for us to just come and talk, whether it's mostly it's been virtual because like we live everywhere, but like just having a safe space for us to like just come together and speak and yell or cry, like whatever that needs to be. Yeah, because also even just like protesting and organizing protesting, that in itself is exhausting and can be traumatizing in the experiences that you experience with, whether it's like supremacists or police. Like there's just it's so much. So just really like big on like taking care of like my community and of course myself.
Yeah, that's it's definitely important to have those safe spaces where people can just cry or vent if they have to about what they are dealing with, just from either hearing the news or protesting or what have you. We had another question, but we are getting close to time. And we did talk about this briefly, but could you leave us with your final thoughts about the future of public safety?
Yeah, I'll be quick. I think it's really up to all of us. I don't, we need to be the architects of what that looks like. We, just have to come together and really just decide what that looks like. And I think especially it's in the hands of those directly impacted, the most affected. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think coming back full circle to Tatiana's first amazing point about gun violence being an issue of poverty, um, gun violence and violence in general has been declared a public health crisis, right? So we know that there are um, deep-rooted systemic issues as to why violence occurs in communities. Um, when people don't have the things that they need, they often turn to illegal ways of getting what they need to survive. It's human nature to want it to survive. Um, and however people are able to do that, oftentimes, or not, I won't say oftentimes, but there are times when people get hurt because of it, and the access to guns and the glorification and all those things of guns contribute to those factors. I say all this to say, if we want to combat gun violence in our communities, we have to look at how we take care of the people within our communities. Is there good access to education, to job opportunities, to food, to healthcare, to mental health resources, to therapy for people who need it? When people have all the things that they need, the 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 capacity for crime will plummet significantly. Um, and there may always be a small faction of people who want to operate outside of what it means, what everybody feels like they need to be safe within society. Um, but then that becomes a community issue, and it doesn't have to be a law enforcement issue. We enter into a social contract with our communities when we live in them, and we need to start taking care of our communities, ourselves, and each other, and ensuring that everybody has what they need to be successful and productive and to live a happy and healthy life and not feel like they have to pick up a gun or use a gun to survive.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here on this panel and sharing your opinions. Tatiana, Alex, and Cami, although she had to leave a bit early. Thank you. I'm glad you were all able to be here and share your insight on these topics.
Yeah, thank you and thank Wave for inviting me. This has been a great experience.